Now we are going to talk about general management strategies in shock, the operational protocol that applies regardless of what type of shock your patient is in. Cardiogenic, septic, hemorrhagic. The core framework is the same. Respiratory support, fluid replacement, vasoactive medications, and systemic nutritional support. These 4 pillars don't change. What changes is how aggressively you apply each one based on what's driving the shock. And all of this requires your whole team working together. This is not a solo sport. And here are your 4 pillars side by side. Respiratory support covers oxygen and ventilation. You are protecting the airway and maximizing the oxygen your damaged tissues can receive. Fluid replacement is about restoring intravascular volume, so the cardiac output has something to work with. Vasoactive medications are your hemodynamic escalation tool. When fluids alone can't hold the MAP, you go pharmacological. And systemic and nutritional support addresses the metabolic catastrophe shock creates in every organ system. None of these pillars works in isolation, and none of them works without the interprofessional team executing them in coordination. 3 fluid pathways, and you need to know when each one is appropriate. Crystalloids are your first line, isotonic solutions that resemble plasma and get volume into the intravascular space fast. Colloids like albumin are large molecule solutions that stay intravascular longer by oncotic pressure, useful when you need sustained volume expansion. Blood products, packed red cells, plasma platelets, are your escalation when the problem isn't just volume, but oxygen carrying capacity or coagulation. Each pathway has a specific clinical indication. First line is crystalloid. You escalate from there based on what the patient needs. This matrix is your fluid selection reference. Commit to the key clinical facts on each row. Normal saline, crystalloid, yes. But with large infusions, you risk hypernatremia, hypokalemia, and a non-anion gap acidosis. That's a real clinical complication in aggressive resuscitation. Lactated ringers is your preferred choice, and here's why. It contains a lactate ion that gets converted to bicarbonate in the liver, which buffers the metabolic acidosis your shock patient already has. You are treating 2 problems with 1 fluid. Hypertonic saline, not recommended, linked to complications, don't go there. Albumin stays intravascular longer, useful in specific cases, but expensive and not superior to crystalloids in outcomes. And watch for anaphylaxis. Rare, but serious. This slide is one of the most important clinical concepts in shock resuscitation. There is a tipping point, and it has 2 deadly sides. Under-resuscitate, give too little fluid, and your patient stays in continued hypoperfusion. Organs starve, cells keep dying. But here's the trap that catches new nurses. Over-resuscitate, give too much. And you trigger a cascade of its own: pulmonary edema, acute lung injury, abdominal compartment syndrome, multiple organ dysfunction syndrome. And the reason this is so difficult is that crystalloids diffuse into the interstitial space. So you have to give higher volumes to achieve the intravascular effect you need, which pushes you dangerously close to the over-resuscitation cliff. Tight monitoring is not optional. It is the job. Abdominal compartment syndrome is a direct complication of aggressive fluid resuscitation, and you need to understand it completely. Step 1. Fluid overload causes leakage into the abdominal cavity. Step 2. The accumulated fluid raises intra-abdominal pressure. Normal IAP is 0 to 5 millimeters of mercury. At 12 or above, you have intra-abdominal hypertension. That is your clinical alarm. Step 3 is the cascade. Cardiac output drops because venous return is impaired by the elevated pressure. The diaphragm gets pushed up and breathing becomes mechanically compromised. Kidneys and GI tract get compressed. Your patient is now in a new crisis on top of the original shock. Severe ACS requires immediate surgical decompression. This is a surgical emergency, not a nursing-managed complication. Pillar 2 is hemodynamic monitoring, and there is a critical evidence update on this slide that you must not miss. CVP, central venous pressure, has historically been used to guide fluid resuscitation. Clinicians used it to tell whether a patient needed more volume. Here's the problem. Research has shown that CVP has poor correlation with actual fluid responsiveness. A patient with a normal CVP can still be volume depleted. A high CVP doesn't reliably mean they're overloaded, so we use CVP for what it's actually good at: reliable central access for delivering fluids, blood products, and vasoactive medications. For assessing volume status, we've moved to better tools: arterial lines for beat-to-beat pressure monitoring, pulmonary artery catheters when indicated, and minimally invasive technology like esophageal Doppler and arterial pulse contour analysis. Central lines are non-negotiable in shock management. You need that access. But every central line is an infection portal, and a central line-associated bloodstream infection in an already compromised shock patient can be fatal. The CLABSI bundle is your nursing responsibility, not a suggestion. 5 steps every time, no exceptions. Hand hygiene before any line interaction. Maximal sterile barrier precautions during insertion and dressing changes. Chlorhexidine for skin antisepsis. Optimal catheter site selection. Subclavian preferred over femoral when possible. And daily review of line necessity. The moment a line is no longer needed, it comes out. An unnecessary central line sitting in your patient is a liability, not an asset. Own this bundle. Vasoactive medications come in when fluids alone can't hold adequate perfusion. 4 non-negotiable rules govern how you manage them. Rule 1. Central line only. Vasoactives in a peripheral IV can cause tissue necrosis if there is extravasation. Never. Rule 2. Vital signs every 15 minutes until hemodynamic stability is achieved. Not every hour, not when you get to it, every 15 minutes. Rule 3. Your target is MAP at or above 65 millimeters of mercury. That is the perfusion floor. You titrate the drug to maintain that number, not to a fixed dose. Rule 4. And this is the one that gets missed. Never stop vasoactives abruptly. These patients are vasopressor dependent. Pull the medication suddenly and you will crash the blood pressure. Taper slowly. Always. To understand why vasoactive medications work, you need to know the receptor map. Alpha receptors drive vasoconstriction. They clamp down the peripheral vasculature in skin, kidneys, and gut to redirect blood to the core. That's what pushes perfusion pressure up. Beta-1 receptors are cardiac. They increase heart rate and myocardial contractility, improving cardiac output. Beta-2 receptors cause vasodilation in skeletal muscle and bronchodilation in the airways. When you understand which receptors a drug targets, you can predict its clinical effect and anticipate its side effects. Norepinephrine is heavily alpha. Vasoconstriction, pressure. Dobutamine is heavily beta-1. Contractility, output. Know the receptor, know the drug. 3 drug classes, and the distinction between them drives your clinical decision-making. Inotropes, dobutamine, dopamine, epinephrine, milrinone, primarily target contractility. They make the heart pump harder and faster. You reach for inotropes when the problem is pump failure, cardiogenic shock, vasodilators, nitroglycerin, nitroprusside, open the vessels. These are used in specific scenarios where afterload reduction is the goal, not as first-line shock drugs. Vasopressors, norepinephrine, vasopressin, phenylephrine, angiotensin II. Clamp down the vasculature to raise perfusion pressure. Norepinephrine is your workhorse first-line pressor in most types of distributive shock. Know which class you're using and why. Exam question. Giving a vasopressor to a patient in cardiogenic shock without also addressing contractility can make things worse. The mechanism matters. Shock puts the metabolic engine into overdrive. Your patient's body is in extreme hypermetabolism and catabolism, burning through energy reserves at a rate normal nutrition cannot keep up with. Caloric demand exceeds 3,000 calories per day. Glycogen stores are the first to go. Fast. Once glycogen is depleted, the body turns to skeletal muscle and cannibalizes it for fuel. The clinical consequence of that is delayed recovery and prolonged weakness. Patients who survive shock but have been catabolizing muscle for days or weeks take much longer to rehabilitate. This is why nutrition is not a comfort measure or a nice-to-have in the ICU. It is an active intervention against the metabolic cost of shock. 2 clinical priorities on this slide, and both are bedside nursing actions. On the nutrition side, early enteral nutrition is preferred. Get the gut working. Enteral feeding maintains gut mucosal integrity, reduces bacterial translocation, lowers infection risk, and improves survival. Use tolerant protocols for gastric residual volumes. The old dogma of holding feeds for any residual has been replaced by more permissive protocols that keep feeds running. Parenteral nutrition is only the fallback when the enteral route is truly contraindicated. On the GI protection side, poor perfusion to the gut during shock dramatically raises the risk of stress ulcers. You prevent this pharmacologically, antacids, H2 blockers like famotidine, or proton pump inhibitors like lansoprazole or esomeprazole. Every shocked patient gets GI prophylaxis. This closing synthesis is your clinical checklist. 4 steps in order. Step 1. Volume and O2. Maximize oxygenation. Run fluids aggressively with lactated ringers as your preferred crystalloid, and watch relentlessly for overload. Step 2. Monitor and prevent. Use central lines for the access you need, execute the CLABSI bundle without exception, and track intra-abdominal pressure to catch ACS before it becomes a surgical emergency. Step 3. Escalate hemodynamics. When fluids fail to hold the MAP at 65, initiate vasoactives via central line, titrate carefully, and taper slowly when weaning. Step 4. Systemic defense. Start enteral nutrition early, hit the metabolic demand, and put every shocked patient on GI ulcer prophylaxis. All right, to close this out, remember that successful shock management comes down to 4 priorities. Restore perfusion, maintain hemodynamic stability, monitor for complications, and support organ recovery. Keep the MAP at or above 65, reassess constantly, avoid both under-resuscitation and fluid overload, and think beyond blood pressure alone. Shock is dynamic, and the nurse at the bedside is often the first person to recognize deterioration. Early intervention, vigilant monitoring, and rapid escalation are what ultimately change outcomes and save lives.